Democrats helped to prep Michael Cohen before he came to testify, and the person behind all of this is the same person you've seen and heard a lot of. His name is Dan Goldman, representative who basically paid for his congressional seat. He's an heir to the Levi Strauss family, got a bunch of money, just dumped it in his race, and now he's in Congress. And ever since he came into Congress, he has been waging a one-man war against Donald Trump, along with Raskin and others, just trying to take out Trump, him versus the DNC versus Trump. It's wild. So we got this clip from him, very short clip, where he comes out and he says, you know, I helped prepare Michael Cohen before he's going to come out and testify. And so let's listen to this short little blurb here from Dan Goldman himself. And he says, you know, he met with him a number of times to prepare him. Isn't that interesting, Dan?
Have deposed Michael Cohen. I have met with him a number of times to prepare him.
Yeah, that's right. Okay, so very curious, Dan. A little slip of the tongue there. And our friends Amuse, Truth Ninja, Laura Loomer have all been digging into this. Amuse pulled this one up today, and he's a great follow on X. He says, is it a coincidence that the Democrat star witness called Michael Cohen has been working with Democrat Representative Dan Goldman to prepare for cross-examination, and that Dan is a customer of acting Justice Mercan's daughter, Wanda Khan? How much is Dan paying Lauren Mercan? Interesting, huh? He says here, full client list from Representative Dan Goldman. Full client authentic. President Lauren Mercan. The judge's daughter. The same judge who is allowing Trump to be railroaded in his courtroom with this rigged trial with star witnesses porn star Daniels and perjurer Michael Cohen. Very, very curious. Now, guess who else she works for? Kamala Harris for president. Also worked for John Tester, Cory Booker, all of these other people. Has literally worked for everybody against Trump. You see any Republicans on here? No. So that is one clip from Amuse. We also had another one from Truth Ninja. He dug into this a little bit further and found this X, and he posted this one in response to Amuse. He shared this one saying, look, he admitted to prepping Michael Cohen for today's testimony. He's given over 150 grand to the judge's daughter who is the president of Authentic Campaign, Dan Goldman for New York. $13,000, $3,500, $2,500, $37,000. It's wild, huh? So they're getting it on both sides. So they're training the witnesses. They have the judge. Goldman's paying the judge's daughter. Just get rid of this guy, okay? Just take care of him. And then Cohen is also meeting with Dan. And Dan's like, I'll prep you for your cross-examination on the witness stand. I'll play a mean Trump opponent. And then we've got Laura Loomer, who is also on X, and she shared this today. Look at this one. Here's a nice little screen grab that Laura Loomer got. Follow her at Laura Loomer. She posted this one, little screen grab from Authentic, posted this on their X account. Nobody's fighting harder to save our democracy and our planet than Dan Goldman, and he'll be an amazing addition to Congress next year. These people are lunatics. They have a God complex, which is just wild. So literally, he's going to go and save democracy and save our planet. Look at Dan Goldman. Save democracy, save planet. All right, Dan, we're all going to die. Thanks for that. Democracy's over. We're all going to die. So that's Dan. Great job. All right, so that apparently is what is happening. They are rallying the DNC. We already know that Matthew Colangelo got paid by the DNC. We already know that Susan Hoffencher donated to Joe Biden and donated to Act Blue. And it's all just happening right here in New York. Isn't it wild? All right, so Trump came out. Avenatti's in prison, and Avenatti is right about this. Trump calls him out. Another great clip from Johnny Maga. Trump just quoted Michael Avenatti outside the courtroom. And here is what Trump said in this exchange. This is this morning before testimony started. Michael Cohen's back on the stand. We're jumping into that next. Here is Trump.
I might just quote somebody that frankly has been extremely respectful to me over the last period of a few months. He's watching this scam taking place. Michael Avenatti.
Yeah.
Remember the name? He said the next time you're accused of something by someone, a coworker, neighbor, friend, significant other, stranger, ask yourself if it would be okay if only they were allowed to speak, accuse, antagonize, while you were not allowed to respond. He's talking about the gag order, or defend yourself in any way. If your answer is no, then you too should be angered by Trump not being allowed to respond to the various people that are making comments.
Exactly right. So he comes out, the media asks a bunch of questions. He can't respond to any of it. And apparently everyone else can. Stormy Daniels can have little tweets about it. Michael Cohen was selling his TikTok Trump in jail t-shirts before he got scolded by the judge. And so Trump is out there. You see gold power tie today. And Todd Blanche is flanking him on his left. left. So that is the scene inside the courtroom, a closer shot of the entourage that was there today. And it's a nice crew here. We got Byron Donalds. We got Doug Burgum. We got Mike Johnson, Vivek Ramaswamy, and Corey Mills all in the house. Looks like a Jason Miller might be in the background. Eric Trump over there. And so it's a full house. And these are some pretty big names. We saw very powerful statements from a bunch of these people this morning, all of them, in fact, in front of the media, showing support, showing solidarity for the president. And they're all in red, except Mike Johnson, who's mostly blue, which is just perfect, isn't it? Isn't that fun? There's some red in there, just some stripes of red, but mostly blue. Okay, so it's absolutely appropriate. The symbolism is just on point. Well done, gentlemen. So, all right, that is the scene. Now we go into testimony, and as per usual, we check in with Inner City Press, who is there and reporting. And so let's get right to it. This is where Michael Cohen picks back up. We're waiting for court to get in session. We just saw Trump. He was outside talking to the press and the media. He's looking sharp. Blue suit, gold tie. In the courtroom, seated at the defense table, talking to Todd Blanche, defense attorney. Todd Blanche is in the lead counsel seat. He's going to be up cross-examining Michael Cohen. We're waiting. There's murmurs and whispers in the courtroom. And then door burst open. All rise. Judge walks in. Please be seated. He throws his robe on. The clerk says, this is the people of the state of New York against the people of the state of New York. So this is the case of the state of New York versus Donald Trump. Indictment number, blah, blah, blah. All right. Good morning, says Judge Merchan. Is there anything that we need to address before we begin this morning? The government prosecutor says, Your Honor, may we approach, please? He says, fine. They walk up to the bench. Whispered sidebar. Trump's back at the defense table. He's leaning to his left. And now he's speaking with the second, which is the lawyer, Emile Beauvais. Susan Nicholas is also in the conversation, but she's in talking to somebody behind her, seated in front of the bar. We go back. And the judge says, we're ready now. Let's go. Bring in the witness. Michael Cohen walks in. Jury's right behind him. Direct exam continues. Government prosecutor says to Cohen, hello again, Mr. Cohen. Nice to have you back. Yeah, good morning. We're going to start back up with Government Exhibit 39. This is a prosecutor, probably Susan Hoffinger speaking. We're starting with this document. Let's put this up. It's a document in evidence. And Mr. Cohen, can you describe to us what People's 39 is, Government 39? He says, yeah, it's an email from Jeff McConney to me. It says, get me the invoices you spoke to Alan about. Thanks, Jeff. Okay, so Jeff McConney to me, get me the invoices you spoke to Weisselberg about. All right, thanks, Jeff. Okay. On February 8th, Michael, did you visit the White House 2017? So this is when Trump is in office. He says, I did. What were you there for? Well, President Trump asked me if I needed money. I said, no, I was okay. He said, though, be sure you talk to Alan. Wow, so you got asked to go to the White House. Yeah. Did you take any photos when you were there, Michael? He says, yeah, I did. How come you took photos? He said, well, because I was visiting the White House. Pretty awesome. So now there are photos. Michael Cohen, he's at the briefing room podium. He goes stands there where Karine used to stands normally. You know, it's really both same capacity. So he says, I could do this job. He's probably right. Government says, this is Exhibit 254. Mr. Cohen, can you tell us what this is? He says, yeah, that's my calendar. And it is an information about February 8th, 2018. That's a calendar. That's your calendar. Yeah. And is that your calendar event? Yeah. And what is this? Well, that's my reply to Jeff McConney. And it's regarding $2 signs. I wrote $2 signs. I wrote, please have the January and February checks payable to Michael D. Cohen, Esquire. Jeff replied, okay, please invoice me. Send me an invoice and then I'll cut you the check. And Cohen says, well, I asked him to remind me of the monthly amount in my email. Well, why'd you have to do that? What's the monthly amount? Why'd you have to get reminded? He said, well, I didn't have the document with me, so I didn't know. And you didn't have a retainer either, did you? I did not. So I created an invoice and emailed it. Said, Dear Alan, pursuant to the retainer, he wrote in his email back to him. So we're just trying to settle a payment. They say, Cohen, send us an invoice. We'll get you paid. So he says, I just created an invoice, but I wrote in there, Dear Alan, pursuant to the retainer, here is my invoice for the amount. Government says, Mr. Cohen, so that's interesting. You sent them an invoice, but had you in fact rendered any services in those 2 months? Objection. Overruled. Prosecutor says, was this invoice a false record? Cohen says, yes. Gasps in the courtroom. And the other invoices were false, Mr. Cohen? Yes. They were. Did you receive 11 checks in 2017, Mr. Cohen? Yes, ma'am, I did. And what is this exhibit for? Check that was sent to me for $70,000 for January and February 2017. It's why we have 34 charges, not 36. And it had a stub attached to it. He says, yeah, it was one of the stubs. And were the descriptions here on this check stub false? He says they were. And who signed this document? He says Eric Trump and Alan Weisselberg signed it. From the Trump Revocable Trust. And this March invoice was false too. This is wild. So is this the crime? I was going to keep going a bit, but I don't want to get too far ahead of ourselves. Is this what they're saying? That the invoices were for 2017, but services were rendered in 2016? So is that illegal? You have to pay your lawyer within net 60 or something like that? Are you nuts? Is that the problem? So services rendered, I created an invoice. I said pursuant to the retainer something, but had you rendered any services in those 2 months? And they don't let that question in. I mean, maybe they do in the further transcript, but then he says, was this invoice a false record? Yes. Why? Because he didn't render any services in those 2 months. No, but he did render legal services before. And what is it? Is there a time cap? Is there some New York statute that says you got to pay your lawyer within 60 days or 90 days or 6 months or something like that? I don't think so. I know lawyers who get paid years later from when they rendered services. Happens all the time. In fact, many of them are called personal injury attorneys who work for free for years and don't get paid until there's a judgment or a settlement. Happens all the time. So he's getting paid based upon the natural course of paying an attorney. They're running a campaign. He got delayed. He's going into the White House. The standard business delays. So is that the crime? That they're saying you sent an invoice that was for services in this specific month and you didn't do anything in this specific month and therefore that's illegal. And you can't bill for past services or something? Okay, so that was a false record. Now the March invoice was false too. Yes, ma'am. And who signed those checks? Well, Trump didn't. Don Jr. did and Alan Weisselberg did. And who signed this one though? Donald Trump signed it. Did you get 8 more of these checks, Mr. Cohen? Yes, I did. And it's going to be a lot of these checks, right? So this invoice was put up for the month of June. 725 Fifth Avenue. It says, Dear Alan. Cohen says, I just cut and pasted it. I said, this is for 2 months because the check for May was lost. Okay, Cohen's so dumb. A check comes in. He's like, I don't know what I did with it. $35,000 check. He's like, I put it in my washing machine. Sorry. Who signed this one? Michael. He says, Donald J. Trump. And July, he says that was 725 Fifth. And how about this one in August? Was this false? Yes. And how about this one? Was that also false? He says, yes, ma'am. And they're probably looking at documents that look something like this. So we had Anna Bauer, who does great reporting as well. She's on X at Anna Bauer. Says we're walking through each of these false invoices. Was this a check that was paid to you pursuant to a retainer agreement? No, ma'am. So that description on the check stub was false. Yes, ma'am. So they're getting into it. So it says it's a retainer. Okay, this is wild. So a retainer agreement, they're saying, I guess you didn't have, Michael Cohen, a written retainer right there, but you're billing for a retainer. And so then my next question is, do you have to have a written retainer in New York? Is there some New York law that they're violating for not having a written retainer? Trump can say, oh, you're on retainer. I'm going to pay you to handle my crap for me and deal with it. And then I'll pay you back. He says, great. Sounds good. Does it need to be in writing in New York? Is there something illegal to that? Like, how is this a false business record? This retainer could be, I think what they're saying is that you were not ultimately retained during this month. You were not retained in 5/1 to 5/31. So we're describing something that's for a past retainer of 2017. So that's got to be it. That's the false business record, is that they're paying him for past services. Now, the argument would say that he's still on retainer, right? There's still theory being that he's still doing stuff for Trump. He is still on retainer, and this payment is for 2017 and for 2016 and all of those other past services. And if you want to continue to get this retainer, because listen, their framing is that all of this is to reimburse for Stormy Daniels. Our argument is no, it's not. That's all Michael Cohen's problem, okay? He came out his pocket. That's his problem. So Trump is paying him $35,000 as a retainer for this month. Now, he can use that retainer to go pay back some of his expenses. It's like if you build a house for somebody, yeah, you got to come out of pocket for the wood, for the concrete, for the electric, for the plumbing, and then you get paid once the money goes through and somebody actually buys the house, right? Everybody kind of gets paid backfill a little bit, right? Or they get the mortgage. You get the point. But you come out of pocket, your cost of goods, then you sell the goods and you go back and you replenish your goods. So this is the retainer for 2017. It just happens to include, you could even say it doesn't include, but Cohen, it's enough so that Cohen can backfill his expenses, but he's still on retainer in 2017. So even that's not a false business record. So the point is they're going through all of this here. Michael Cohen gets it, check 523, 35 grand. Here's another one. Trump signed it, right? So we can see what they're talking about. So they go through all this. So October. So you didn't render any services in there, did you either? Was that also false? Yeah. And so every single, okay, this is Cohen now going through every charge. This is the kill shot. This is the big one. This is the big climactic event that we're all waiting for. Every one of those. So the October invoice, also false. Yes. And what about 37J? November, we offer this one. Was that one false too, Mr. Cohen? Yes. Was the check false? Yes. Was the stub false? Yes. Then how about this one? Government 37K. This is for December. 725, it says, Dear Alan, he reads it again. Was that false, that invoice for December. Was that false? There was no retainer? He says, right. And so he says, yes, ma'am. And was that the last invoice you sent? He says, yes, because now I had been reimbursed. Okay, this wasn't a retainer agreement. He's saying now the total debt has been repaid. And on this check, Mr. Cohen, who signed it? Donald J. Trump. Trump paid legal fees to his personal lawyer. Government says, Mr. Cohen, in 2016, did you do any work for Mr. Trump or his wife, Melania? Here's my point. Was he still working? Was he doing stuff for Trump? Was he still on call? Was he still taking Trump's calls and working with him, showing up and doing stuff? Yeah, he was. He says, oh, it was minimal. One matter for Mr. Trump, Summer Zervos, and something about the likeness of Mrs. Trump. There you go. Dude's on retainer. 2017, he just admitted it's not a false business record. His current retainer can pay for other things, but he was also doing work in 2017. Did you receive emails from Alan Garden? This case is so terrible. It's wild when your own witness says, yeah, I was actually doing legal work for him in 2017, so the retainer is not backdated, not illegally false, because he was on retainer at the time. Did you receive emails from Alan Garden? He says, I did, but I was doing very minimal work. Now, how many hours did you work for Trump in 2017? Okay, here's where Cohen's credibility just totally gets shot. He says 10 total. So then the jury's supposed to say, well, why are they getting him $35,000 a month if he's only working 10 hours total? It's like an hour a month, 35 grand a month. He says only 10. And in 2018, as a result of Stormy Daniels going public, that's a ridiculous number. They could probably go back and say, how many times did you appear on talk shows? More than 10 hours. Mr. Trump wanted arbitration actions to be filed against her as a result of Stormy. And so I was contacted by Eric Trump and Mr. Trump, and I worked with Larry Rosen. And did you monetize the position as personal counsel to the president? He says, yeah, I did. He was excited about it. He says, yeah, I had 5 clients. $4 million is how much money I made. Also, Squire Patton Boggs. They paid me $500,000 bifurcated. People are just throwing money at this dude just to get access, which is just a sad state of affairs for our country, isn't it? I had offices in their space in New York and DC. They wanted me on their letterhead. That's how much power the president has. Wild times. Now, prosecutor continues. Michael, did you get subpoenaed by Congress to come in and talk to them? He says, yeah, I did. I was called into Congress to talk about Trump Tower in Moscow. Did you have an attorney at the time when you got called in there? He says, yeah. Who paid for those? Trump organization did. And as part of their representation, was there any deal you had with them? They said, yeah, I was subject to a joint defense agreement. So that's how he executed it. And Mr. Cohen, did you make any false statements to Congress at some point? He says, yes, I did. And why, Mr. Cohen? Why did you make those false statements to Congress? Well, I was staying on President Trump's message that there was no Russia story. And so I went out and I just said that. And I had to lie for him. And did you continue to lie and pressure others to lie about the payoffs to Stormy and McDougal? Yes. And Michael, did you speak with President Trump? I wonder if she called him President Trump because he was president at the time. Did you speak with President Trump when he was president? Yes, through Madeleine Westerhout, who was basically an executive assistant who sat right outside the Oval. Who's on these text messages, Mr. Cohen, that I'm showing you now? He looks at it and says, well, that's me and Keith Davidson. And this joint defense agreement, when you went in to talk to Congress, who benefited from that agreement? Objection! Sidebar. They walk up, talk to Judge Mercan. He says, that objection sustained. Please proceed. Prosecutor continues saying, what was your understanding of who benefited from the joint defense agreement? Objection! Overruled. Asked it a little differently. Okay, he can't know who benefited from it, but what was your understanding of who benefited from it? Okay, very fun. Well, my understanding, says Cohen. He says, Mr. Trump. He's not qualified to say who benefited from this agreement. You know, he didn't help construct it or anything. Mr. Trump benefited. Okay, thanks, Judge, for letting that come in. Government says, Mr. Cohen, did you arrange to have Miss Daniels, Stormy, on the Sean Hannity show in this period? Yes, but she did not go on. She went on Kimmel, but signed a statement before doing that. And did you know that that statement that she signed was false? Yes, I did. Michael, did you get an FEC complaint? Yes. And McDermott, Will, and Emery replied on my behalf. And when your lawyers replied for you, and we talked about this yesterday, was that a false statement? He says, I don't know if it's false, but I'd say it was more misleading. And how about this statement? It says, Big Boss just approved. Me responding. Start writing and I will call you soon. Mr. Cohen, what was that? Says it'd be a scoop. Now the judge chimes in and says, okay, ladies and gentlemen, now jurors, I want to tell you this. This section of testimony here is to help you assess Mr. Cohen's credibility. Now, neither the fact of the FEC investigation nor the responses constitute any evidence in this case. They're just talking about Cohen's credibility. And the government is doing what is called drawing the sting. They are getting stung first. Like, let this bad information come out in our control rather than letting the Trump cross-examination slam him with this. So don't hold this against Trump. Trump, the fact that there's an FEC investigation, don't hold that against Trump jurors, but let's just talk about this for Cohen. So you got an FEC complaint, right, Mr. Cohen? Yeah, the Federal Elections Committee. And did you provide that information to Jay Sekulow, who works for Trump? I did. I want to show you this exhibit. What did Jay Sekulow write to you, Mr. Cohen? He wrote, client says thanks for what you do. Mr. Cohen, did you speak with David Pecker? Todd Blanche says, Your Honor, briefly, may I have a word? He talks to the prosecutor. They stand up, talk about this. Your Honor, we need to come up there. Can we come up for a sidebar? They go up to the sidebar. Prosecutor comes back. Judge says, okay, listen, jurors. Again, on this one, since we have so much irrelevant information in this case, the judge has to confirm. Says, okay, the information, jurors, about AMI is only for you to assess the credibility of David Pecker, who's, again, irrelevant to a lot of this because there's no charged conduct related to droopy Karen McDougal. Cohen says, okay, I told David Pecker that Jeff Sessions would take care of it, who now Trump is in charge. So Jeff Sessions was the short-lived attorney general. Now, that's what President Trump had told me. Trump said, my AG is just going to take care of this whole thing, which sounds insane. Trump said, I'll just do whatever I want, which is exactly what they want the jurors to believe. It's a perfect line, perfectly crafted for the lefty jurors on the jury. Prosecutor to Cohen, did you file for arbitration in California about AMI and McDougal? We had a Trump Organization California lawyer file it. We served her counsel, and her lawyer was Michael Avenatti. Did Mr. Avenatti file a lawsuit for Miss Daniels? Yes, he did. President Trump was going to be required to sit for a deposition, and so the NDA was stricken. So Trump just said, I'm not sitting for a depo, just release the NDA, make this whole thing moot. That's why the NDA got dropped. And Mr. Cohen, what happened in April 2018? Cohen says, oh, it was terrible. I was raided by the FBI. I was sitting there in the Regency Hotel, and at 7 a.m., there was a ton of people in the hall. They raided my apartment. They raided my law office. They raided my bank, which had a safety deposit box I had just opened. They took my 2 phones, okay? So this guy just got a pure judicial enema, man, from our Justice Department. And they probably found so much on him to make a person flip 35 times. He'd flip on his mother. After the raid, President Trump called me and said, don't worry, I'm the U.S. president. And there's nothing to worry about. That is a call that has never happened ever, obviously. Trump calls him, hey, Michael, just saw you got raided by the feds. I'm willing to jeopardize everything for you and say this on a phone call. What a lunatic. I can't believe he said that in court. And the prosecutor's like, great, perfect. So Trump's a little dictator. He's going to weaponize the DOJ to protect you for orchestrating this conspiracy. Michael, have you spoken with Trump since? No. And did others reach out to you? Yes, they did. They said he has your back. Now, the prosecutor is now showing various tweets. Some of the tweets are up. They're saying, what's Trump saying, Mr. Cohen? In these tweets, he's saying, don't flip in the tweets. And Klasfeld had some of these tweets at Klasfeld Reports. The post from Trump says something like this. The New York Times and a third-rate reporter named Maggie Haberman, loser, known as Crooked H. Flunky, who I don't speak to and have nothing to do with, are going out of their way to destroy Michael Cohen and to use his relationship with me in hopes that he will flip. Exactly, and he did. They use non-existent sources and a drunk, drugged-up loser who hates Michael, a fine person with a wonderful family. Michael's a businessman with his own account lawyers. I've always liked and respected, but most people will flip if the government lets them out of trouble, even if it means lying and making up stories. Sorry, I don't see Michael doing that. Sorry, Trump, bad call on that one, but he did flip because they probably raided his box. He's like, I just opened the safety deposit box. He's like, perfect. Let me put all of my secret illegal contacts in here. They'll be secure. 2 days later, raided by the feds. And they go and they flip him. Of course, they have now done that. And so they take a break and we're back. Says, let's begin. Prosecutor brings in the jury. Witnesses are back up. Prosecutor starts. Mr. Cohen, are you familiar with Robert Costello? He says, yeah, I was introduced by Jeffrey. We were both on an advisory board of Sterling National Bank. He said Costello was close with Rudy Giuliani. And what did Mr. Costello tell you about his relationship with Rudy Giuliani? He said he was very close with Rudy, says Cohen, and it could be a back channel communication to the president to make sure you are still good and still secure. And he showed me a retainer agreement, even though I was still speaking with other lawyers. It felt a little sketchy to me. Now, I didn't want what I told him to be told to Rudy and to President Trump. And are these emails with Mr. Costello? He says, yes, says Michael. And they're offering a back channel. Government says, read that for us, Mr. Cohen. Cohen says, Costello wrote, he said, you have friends in high places. Sleep well. Now, what'd you think of Costello writing about his friend speaking to his client? Cohen says, it was spyish. It was a little bit weird. I think that they were dangling a pre-pardon, he says, as long as I just got quiet. Now, they were concerned that I was going to hire another lawyer from some other boutique firm. And the government says, well, what's this? It's from Bob Costello. He had sent me a link to YouTube. And on YouTube, it's Rudy Giuliani. Giuliani. It was Rudy Giuliani talking about the possibility of Cohen cooperating in the Mueller probe. Cohen says, why are you sending me Rudy talking about me cooperating with Mueller? Costello said back to me, the Southern District of New York is trying to drain you until you see them as your only salvation. These left-wing journalists want you to fail. If you want more from your former boss, you should make that well known. The government says, well, what's going on here? What are all these messages coming in for you for? Cohen says it was a pressure campaign. And so I hired other lawyers and I spoke with my family and I didn't know what to do. They said, why are you hanging on to that loyalty to him? They said, my family said, we're supposed to come first. And I had to think about my kids. And so what did you decide to do, Mr. Cohen? I decided that my loyalty should be to my family and to my country. Did you plead guilty to excessive campaign contributions to Stormy Daniels, Michael? He says, yes, I did. And did you do that to influence? Objection! They go up sidebar. Trump's talking with Emile Beauvais. Objection is sustained. They don't get to have him say to influence an election. Mr. Cohen, why did you pay Stormy Daniels for Mr. Trump's campaign? I guess to interfere with an election? Is this now the object crime? We're still asking what the object offense is here, whether it is a campaign violation at a federal level, a tax crime at a New York State level, whether it's a local New York election crime, even though this is a federal election. We don't know. And prosecutor says, and you pled guilty to a role in this, the FEC illegal corporate contribution scheme, didn't you? Yes, I did. For AMI as it related to Karen McDougal. Karen McDougal, they were going to call as a witness here, not having her anymore. The judge reminds the jurors again, jurors, the FECA violation is only to assess Cohen's credibility. And it just provides some context here. It doesn't mean Trump's guilty just because he's guilty. Cohen's guilty doesn't mean Trump's guilty. Now, did you plead guilty to tax evasion? And did you plead guilty to a false statement to a financial institution? There you go. Yeah, but those were unrelated to Mr. Trump. After you pled guilty, Michael, did President Trump tweet something about you? They show a tweet about don't retain Michael Cohen because he's a terrible attorney. And here, this might be that. It says, I feel very badly for Paul Manafort and his wonderful family. Justice took a 12-year-old tax case, among other things, applied tremendous pressure on him, and unlike Michael Cohen, he refused to make up stories in order to get a deal. Such respect for a brave man, unlike Michael, right? He did break, Cohen did. And it's pretty interesting to read these tweets in hindsight. Now, you know, Trump was the president at the time. I'm just like, gosh, he should have just cleaned house at the DOJ. Just ransack everything. You're all fired. Maybe next time. All right, so that continues. Now, did you then plead guilty to false statements about that? He says, yeah. What effect did that tweet that we just read? What effect does that have on you, Michael? He says, tweets like that give me angst and anxiety. Mr. Cohen, did you then plead guilty to false statements to Congress about Trump Tower? Yes, I did. And when were you sentenced? On December 12th. Were you sentenced 2018? He says, yes, I was. I was sentenced to 36 months and I had to pay restitution and 2 fines. And so I self-surrendered, says Michael Cohen, on May 6, 2019. Did you go and testify to Congress before your self-surrender date? He says, yes, I did. Representative Elijah Cummings reached out to me through Lanny Davis, who's a Clinton super lawyer. Were you on TV, Mr. Cohen? He says, yes, I was. Before I went to prison, I apologized to the country. And did you provide testimony to the Office of the Special Counsel? He says, yes, I did. I admitted that my previous testimony to Congress was false. And how much time did you serve and where, Mr. Cohen? 13 months in Otisville. So 3 years goes down to 13 months. Then he goes back to home confinement after that. And did you go back to prison briefly? He says, objection, overruled. Well, I was to head up to Bronx to the GEO, but I received a call from Adam at Pearl Street. Somebody told me I needed to be there. So I asked Jeffrey K. Levine to come. And they showed me an agreement when I was there that violated the First Amendment. Objection. Judge lets it in. He says, prosecutor says, well, I'm going to ask you a few leading questions, okay, to keep us on track here. Did the agreement constrain your ability to speak? So it must be probation. So yes, the agreement said I couldn't talk about this. And yes, I was writing a book. And so in March, did you testify to the grand jury? Yes. And did you have immunity before you testified to this grand jury here? Yes, that's my understanding from my lawyer. And have you asked us to help you get your federal sentence reduced? Yes, I did. And was it your understanding that the Southern District of New York prosecutors declined to receive such a letter to reduce this? Yes. But our offer, has it influenced your testimony if we are going to reduce your penalty? Has it influenced your testimony in any way, Mr. Cohen? No. What did you do with your old phones when you didn't need them anymore? Cohen says, well, one I put in a box and another I put in a pouch. And I was FOIA-ing the Bureau of Prisons and I wanted to record the conversation. So I powered up the older cell phone. Okay, what'd you do with your cell phones after prison? Were you under any legal restriction on how you could use the phones? No. And did you give us your phones on January 2023? He says, yes, I did. And I had not altered my previous recording with Mr. Trump. Have you made public statements, Mr. Cohen, that you should not have been prosecuted on tax and bank statement charges? Do you dispute that fact? Objection. Overruled. Well, they told me, says Cohen, they said that they would charge my wife on the taxes since she signed them as well. And the HELOC loan, I dispute that it was material at all. But you ultimately accepted responsibility for those things, didn't you? On those other cases that he pled guilty to. I did. In fact, I'm still under supervised release. I'm still on probation. He's trying to get his probation terminated. And he's like, I'm a law-abiding citizen, so terminate my probation. And the judge is saying back to him, no, you committed perjury again, either in Tish's courtroom or when you took your guilty plea. So no. Did you testify in Tish's Trump org case? Cohen says, yeah, I was a star witness there too. These prosecutors in New York are idiots. And were you cross-examined about various statements, Mr. Cohen? Todd Blanche is standing up. He says, oh, I see Mr. Blanche is standing up. You want to approach? They go up. They have a conversation. Judge says the objection's withdrawn. He probably rephrases. Do you admit to lying to Southern District of New York judge? They had to ask this question. Did you admit to lying to Southern District of New York Judge Pauley when you took your guilty plea, Mr. Cohen? You lied to him? I did. I was given 48 hours to plead guilty or they would indict my wife from the DOJ. But you didn't lie to Judge Pauley about campaign finance, did you? No, ma'am. Are you a lawyer? No, says Cohen. I was disbarred. And as a felon, I can't own New York City taxi medallions. And I think there were articles. He was very in the hole on that. Do you have any real estate, Mr. Cohen? He says, well, only one secondary apartment other than my residence. And what do you do now? Media and entertainment. What do you do for that? So, well, I do a podcast called Mea Culpa, which are my initials, MC, Mea Culpa, MC, Michael Cohen. And I do another podcast with Midas, those weirdos over there. And I also wrote a book called Disloyal. What about a book called Revenge? Did you write that? He says, yeah, it's about the Southern District of New York's corrupt prosecution against me and the weaponization of the DOJ, which is absolutely true. In February 2021, Mr. Cohen, did you invite Stormy Daniels onto your Mea Culpa podcast? And did you podcast with Stormy? Yes, we podcasted all night long. I made that last part up. Yes, I did. I invited her on. Have you continued to be the recipient of negative posts by Mr. Trump? Well, I was. They show a horse-faced Truth Social post again. So Stormy's on there. We'll spare our eyeballs. And Mr. Cohen, did Mr. Trump sue you? He says he did, yeah, for $500 million, but he ultimately dismissed it. Michael, do you have any regrets about your past work with Donald Trump? He says, yes, I did. I did things for him that I should not have done. I was bullying people. There were good times, but I've lost my moral compass. No further questions. Thank you, Mr. Cohen. The judge says, okay, we'll break there. Jurors will break for lunch and we'll come back after the break. We'll pause there. We'll end this segment here and then we'll come back for cross-examination in our next segment.